Twin brothers fight for their mother in court. Judge shocked to discover he's their father. In a silent courtroom, two young black twins stood side by side, their hands clasped tightly in their mother's. Their eyes, too young to have seen so much pain, stared at the judge who looked back at them with cold detachment. Everyone thought the verdict was obvious. The mother would lose, and the twins would be torn away. But what no one in that courtroom realized was that a secret buried for years was about to explode. The man in the judge's chair, the one demanding order and control, was not just a stranger deciding their future. He was their father, the man who had abandoned them, now unknowingly judging the children he left behind, where poverty and prejudice often dictated the course of justice. The twins, Jamal and Jordan, were raised by their mother, Angela, a hard-working black woman who fought every day to shield her boys from the ugliness of a world that refused to see them as innocent children. She worked 2 jobs, walked them to school every morning, and taught them to carry themselves with dignity, even when the world tried to strip it away. But life had been unkind. Angela's landlord, a wealthy white man with deep connections in town, filed false accusations against her after she refused his unwanted advances. He claimed she was unfit to raise her children, painting her as unstable, dangerous, and incapable. And because of who he was, the case was pushed through the system with alarming speed. The townsfolk whispered, some pitying, others cruelly predicting Angela would lose. After all, how could a poor black woman stand against a man of influence, backed by a system designed to protect its own? Still, Angela stood firm. She refused to bow down because she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for Jamal and Jordan, who deserved a future not defined by lies. When the case finally reached court, Angela was exhausted but unbroken. She held her boys' hands tightly as they walked in, unaware of the cruel twist fate had prepared. The judge assigned to her case, Judge William Harrington, was no ordinary man. Unbeknownst to everyone present, he was the very man who had fathered Jamal and Jordan, and abandoned Angela when she was most vulnerable. The courtroom atmosphere was suffocating. On one side sat the landlord and his expensive attorneys, smirking with the arrogance of men who had already written the ending. On the other side, Angela sat with her public defender, underfunded and overworked, struggling to find footing against the tidal wave of influence and prejudice. The prosecution wasted no time in painting Angela as reckless and unfit. They highlighted her long working hours as neglect, twisting her sacrifices into accusations against her. They called her neighborhood dangerous, her income insufficient, and her struggles as evidence that her children deserved better. Each word was like a dagger, turning her love and labor into weapons against her. Jamal and Jordan sat quietly, their small frames dwarfed by the seriousness of the courtroom. But even they could feel the disdain in the room, the way people glanced at them as though their future had already been signed away. Every biased statement reinforced the ugly truth. They weren't seen as children. They were black boys in a system that never gave them the benefit of innocence. Judge Harrington, stern and unreadable, listened intently. He asked sharp questions, pushing Angela's defense into corners. To those watching, he seemed impartial but strict. Yet there were moments, a pause when he looked at the twins, a flicker in his eyes that hinted at something deeper. Angela, exhausted, could only endure. She knew her history with the judge, though she had never dared to believe he would recognize the truth. Years ago, William had been a young attorney, full of promises. They had shared a brief love, one that ended abruptly when Angela became pregnant. He had vanished, leaving her to face the world's judgment alone. She had buried that chapter, raising her boys with pride but never bitterness. Now, fate had brought them face to face, though under the cruelest of circumstances. As the trial dragged on, Angela's attorney finally called for testimony from community members. Teachers, neighbors, even church members spoke of her devotion, her tireless efforts, and the love she poured into her children. The twins' school principal described them as polite, intelligent, and resilient. Yet every word seemed to fall flat against the prosecution's towering accusations, backed by wealth and privilege. The courtroom held its breath as the decision neared. The scales of justice tilted, not by truth, but by influence. The twins clutched each other, sensing the weight of what was to come. And though Judge Harrington tried to maintain composure, the undeniable resemblance between him and the boys grew harder to ignore. Their eyes, their expressions, even their mannerisms. It was as though he was staring into a mirror of his younger self. The tension built, and whispers began to ripple through the courtroom. Something was not right. Something hidden was clawing its way to the surface. Then came the breaking point. As Angela prepared to make her final plea, Jamal and Jordan stood up beside her. The room hushed, every eye on the two boys who had been silent throughout the proceedings. Though young, they carried themselves with a dignity that silenced the murmurs. They didn't speak. This was no grand speech or dramatic outburst. Instead, they simply stood side by side and turned their gaze directly at Judge Harrington. The room froze. The resemblance was undeniable. Gasps escaped from the audience, and whispers spread like wildfire. The twins' faces, their posture, even the sharpness of their features, all mirrored the man sitting in judgment. Judge Harrington's mask cracked. His gavel shook in his hand as he struggled to maintain order, but the damage was done. The truth, long buried, had revealed itself without a single word spoken. He saw not just children, not just defendants in a biased case, but his own blood staring back at him. Angela's eyes met his, filled not with anger, but with a quiet strength. She did not expose him, did not call out his name. She simply stood tall, allowing the truth to speak for itself. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, a silence that screamed louder than any testimony. For the first time, Judge Harrington faltered. The gavel that had always symbolized authority now felt like a weight of shame in his hand. The walls of power and prejudice he had hidden behind crumbled. He was not just a judge anymore. He was a man confronted by the ghosts of his past, by the children he had abandoned, by the truth he could no longer deny. In the end, the case did not conclude the way anyone had expected. Judge Harrington, shaken and unable to ignore the truth, delivered a verdict in Angela's favor. The landlord's accusations were dismissed, his lies exposed for what they were, a weapon of power against the powerless. But for the twins and their mother, the victory was bittersweet. Justice had been served, yes, but the scars of the trial remained. They had stood on the brink of losing everything, not because of guilt, but because of the color of their skin and the weight of a system designed to oppress. Judge Harrington never spoke of the revelation. He never admitted the truth aloud, never acknowledged the boys as his own, but the silence was telling. Every time his eyes lingered on Jamal and Jordan, it was clear that he knew, and that knowledge, unspoken yet undeniable, became its own form of judgment, not against Angela, but against himself. For Angela, the outcome reaffirmed her strength. She had fought against impossible odds, not with wealth or power, but with resilience, dignity, and love. Her sons walked out of that courtroom hand in hand, not broken, but stronger. They had seen the ugliness of injustice, but also the unyielding power of truth. It is a reflection of countless untold stories, where prejudice hides behind laws and where justice is too often determined by privilege. But it is also a reminder that truth has a way of emerging, even in the darkest places. So the question remains, how many more children, how many more mothers must stand in courtrooms like this, fighting not for justice but for survival? And when will the system finally see them for who they truly are, innocent, deserving, and human? Because sometimes the most powerful verdict is not the one written on paper, but the one carved into the conscience of those who can no longer deny the truth.